Welcome to Al Bernstein Unplugged on Boxing. In a 40-year Hall of Fame career, Al has chronicled some of the greatest moments in boxing history. On this podcast, you get to hear him expand on those memories and talk about the current news in the sport of boxing. You'll also hear Al interview some of the biggest names in the sport. Here's Al Bernstein Unplugged.
Hi, everybody. Al Bernstein here with the second of our podcasts/shows called Al Bernstein Unplugged on Boxing. We're happy that you joined us for this episode. I think it's going to be a fun one. As we do in every show, we're going to chat with you vis-a-vis the questions that you submitted on Twitter. I'll answer some of those. We'll also have our flashback segment, which tonight features a 2003 fight between the great Joe Calzaghe and Brian Mitchell in a exciting 168-pound match that had great significance at that time in the super middleweight division. And we will have in our interview segment a gentleman that I really like and enjoy as a broadcaster and as a man, Brian Custer, the host of Showtime Championship Boxing and also a very fine broadcaster on Fox and other networks as well. So we've got a lot of interesting things to cover in this episode, and here to do it with me, as he was for our maiden voyage, my good friend Trip Mitchell. Trip, we are on to show number 2, and I think we already defied those people that said this wouldn't last.
Well, I've gotten a call from Netflix to see if they can start to stream the show. You know, you could binge with us and go 2 hours.
We could be binge watching, like all the shows that everyone is watching. And I was on an interview with a boxing show. I don't know, a week ago or so. And, of course, they asked what I've been binge watching. And I believe I lost about 30% of the demographic of people that like me when I said that the one show I've been binging the most is Veronica Mars.
Al, I'm a little worried.
Yeah. They were very concerned about me as well. So we're, maybe it's being delusional about being home and secluded into a small place. So along with the binge watching, we hope folks are watching this and enjoying us. And we've got, even though there are no boxing matches going on, there are some things that are creating news.
Well,
not happy news.
Yeah, some happy news, some unhappy news, and we'll start with the latter. Eddie Cotton passed away at the age of 72, a referee who'd done some big-time fights, including Lennox Lewis Tyson from Memphis.
Yeah, Eddie Cotton was a wonderful referee. And for those that knew Eddie Cotton, he was a delightful man. He refereed many fights in Atlantic City, got his career started in 1992. And during all those years when there was really a lot of boxing in Atlantic City, he refereed many of those fights. You mentioned the Lewis Tyson fight also down in Memphis where they brought down officials, and he was the referee of that one. And Eddie Cotton was kind of specialized in doing the heavyweight fights. He was a big man, and he was able to kind of physically deal with the heavyweights, which is not easy for referees to do. And he did a number of heavyweight fights featuring the likes of Riddick Bowe, Andrew Galata, of course, Lewis Tyson, Holyfield, and made a name for himself in the sport because of that. Beyond the sport of boxing, he was very active civically. He was a councilman in Paterson, New Jersey, and was very civically involved in his community. So Eddie Cotton passing away from the coronavirus at age 72, and so that terrible affliction that's afflicting our society impacts the boxing world by taking away from us a lovely man and a great referee in Eddie Cotton.
So, quick follow-up to that. You've worked so many fights over the years. Have there been any circumstances where a smaller referee gets in working a heavyweight fight and is just physically outmatched?
Yeah, there have been cases like that. It's an interesting question because if you're really a small person, you it's harder to deal with these bigger men, and trying to get in there and push them away and make sure that they follow the rules. And there have been times when there have been smaller referees and they've had a difficult time physically moving these men. And depending on the cooperation level of the heavyweights, it can be a struggle.
And now some positive news. Eddie Hearn is looking to do some fights pretty darn quickly, maybe an announcement the first week in May. He wants to get a site over in the UK that's going to be purpose-built for boxing and get going on some cards. That's wonderful news.
Yeah, he's the head of Matchroom Boxing, and they are one of the major promoters in England and, in fact, in the world. And his plan is that probably starting sometime in late June or early July, he feels like he can use this facility, which you pointed out is being repurposed right now. He won't say where it's at, for boxing. He calls it a unique environment that will help provide for the safety of fighters and those involved. Of course, those matches would not have audiences. They would not have crowds. And they would be primarily to provide content for his network provider, which in his case is Sky Sports over in the UK. And he feels like that would last for at least 4 to 6 weeks when boxing comes back, and it would include multiple matches. Obviously, it's not going to be hard for people to find matches to make because everyone's been on the shelf. And so he's going to do this and hopefully make it a safe environment for the boxers and for those involved. Boxing's in a unique position in that it is likely, along with other combat sports like mixed martial arts, it may be in a slightly better position to come back a little quicker based on the safety questions and how we're doing overall in society, because you only have 2 participants and they can be tested. You would, of course, test the officials involved, the TV people, including the announcers, and you would be able, in theory, then to put on what would be, in effect, studio TV boxing, even though it might be in a slightly bigger environment. So the chances of boxing coming back a little bit quicker than some of the other sports looks like a feasibility. And of course, if you are a promoter, we're going to have Bob Arum on our show next week, and he is talking about that as well, and we'll be able to have a fuller conversation with him about what he and Top Rank are planning.
Now, is the rumor true that you've offered up one of your ballrooms downstairs at the Bernstein Mansion for Top Rank to do some fights?
I did, and it's a fully equipped ballroom. Occasionally, taking a playbook from something from the Jack Benny playbook from many years ago. I like to have side businesses, and so I do weddings, bar mitzvahs, and other affairs down there. So yes, I'm perfectly happy to offer it up.
It's nice to do those little extra things for the sport you love.
Yeah, exactly.
So Devin Haney got himself in a little controversy this week. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, it's interesting. Devin Haney, the lightweight, now has a lightweight championship, and he is a superb fighter. And part of that whole group that we talked about in the last show of lightweight fighters who are, Teofimo Lopez, of course, Vasily Lomachenko, Gervonta Davis, Ryan Garcia, this group of talented people that we're hoping will all fight each other. Lomachenko and Lopez are scheduled to fight when things get back in order. And they were talking to Devin Haney about Lomachenko, and he gave a response similar to the one Bernard Hopkins gave when he was getting ready to fight Joe Calzaghe, when he said, kind of tongue-in-cheek, there's no white boy that's going to beat me. At the time, it, of course, engendered a little bit of controversy, but Bernard Hopkins, being Bernard Hopkins, he was able to do it in a kind of a tongue-in-cheek way that diminished the blowback that he received. Haney said essentially the same thing about Lomachenko. and it did engender controversy, and some people thought it was a totally inappropriate statement, likening it to whether a white fighter would say that about an African American or Latino fighter or any person of color. And the interesting thing to me about all this is boxing is a sport that has, while of course you can never completely eliminate racism and prejudice from any part of our universe, unfortunately, but you can diminish it, and boxing has, for the most part, diminished it. The best line I've ever heard is that the only color that really matters in boxing is the color green. So that's the key color. And so this particular incident with Haney was one that, especially, I think in the charged environment that we live in and polarizing environment we live in, created some issues. He, of course, immediately came out with a statement saying he's not a racist. He didn't mean it to be a racial discriminatory comment, and I'm sure that things will move on past it. But it's a reminder that in every venue we will be faced with people saying things that certainly are ill-advised. I mean, I think he would agree, and probably those around him would agree. It was probably an ill-advised comment. But nonetheless, he'll get past it, and he may, if the cards are lining up right for him, he will become a great, great fighter in the lightweight division. Now, someday he hopes to be in a fight that will be featured on this show as a flashback. And this week's flashback is a match that I did in 2003. It was, in fact, the second show that I did with Showtime when I moved over to that network from ESPN. And I would travel all the way to Wales to do the match between Joe Calzaghe and Brian Mitchell. It was at the International Arena in Cardiff, Wales. And it was the 13th defense of Joe Calzaghe's super middleweight title. He had the WBO title at the time. And Brian Mitchell, who was a two-time former WBA champion, was thought to be a very, very good potential opponent for Joe Calzaghe. It was a dangerous fight. And Mitchell was 29 years old at the time. Calzaghe was 31. And it was expected to be a thriller. It was exactly that. Calzaghe came out in the fight in a way that was even much more aggressive than normal for him. He threw caution to the wind, and in round one, he was battering Brian Mitchell. He was all over him. He was landing all kinds of shots, though many of the shots were wide, which is also a little bit uncharacteristic for Joe Calzaghe. He was getting all them in. Now, in round one, I said that Joe Calzaghe was squaring himself up, meaning turning his body to square himself up when he was throwing a lot of those wide hooks and wide left hands. And I said this could be a problem for him as this fight wears on because he's leaving himself open to counterpunches. Well, round one went into the books, and we went to round two. And Joe Calzaghe was still on the attack. And it was exciting, his hometown crowd in Wales, and he was hurting Brian Mitchell until the fun stopped when a right hand from Brian Mitchell sent Calzaghe crashing to the canvas. A counter right hand is one of the ones I thought might come because of the way Calzaghe was fighting. Calzaghe went down, and he was genuinely hurt. It was not a flash knockdown. He got up. The next 30 seconds was trench warfare with both men battling away, landing just huge shot after huge shot. And Steve Albert on the call with me said this is a candidate for round of the year. And it was indeed that. Then all of a sudden, Calzaghe landed a big shot and sent Mitchell crashing to the canvas. And Mitchell was really badly hurt. He got up. Again, it was a Pier 6 brawl. But after Calzaghe had dealt out some more punishment, referee Dave Harris stepped in and stopped the fight. Probably the stoppage was a little bit premature. And of course, here we have Calzaghe in his home stadium with a referee from the UK, and Brian Mitchell and his team were none too happy about it. He was clearly in trouble and clearly hurt, but many believe the stoppage was a little bit premature. Probably Joe Calzaghe would have gotten him out of there at some point, but because Mitchell had shown he was dangerous, the premature stoppage caused some issues. And after the fight, they were very distressed and voiced their protests about it. But nonetheless, Joe Calzaghe got what was for him an important victory. And that was a fight in which Calzaghe showed the kind of grit that everyone assumed he had, but getting up from that vicious knockdown and being so badly hurt and coming back to win in exciting fashion kind of set in motion, even at age 31, a final part of Joe Calzaghe's career that was more impressive probably than even anything that preceded it. 3 years later, we would be back in the UK, this time at the MEN Arena in Manchester, where he would fight another American, Jeff Lacey, in a fight that most pundits, especially the pundits in America, thought Jeff Lacey was going to win. Lacey was at that time at 168, a big puncher who was knocking people out. And Lacey and his folks were confident that he was going to go over to the UK and knock out Joe Calzaghe. And remember, Calzaghe at age 34 at that point, well into his career, could have been a veteran that was ripe for an upset. Turned out to be just the opposite. Joe Calzaghe fought maybe his best fight of his career, dominated Jeff Lacey, then moved up to light heavyweight and beat veterans Roy Jones Jr. and Bernard Hopkins before his career would end. And Joe Calzaghe retired with a 46-0 record and was inducted into the International Boxing Hall of Fame. And the catalyst, I think, for him starting to get real recognition on this side of the pond in America and maybe worldwide was, in fact, the flashback that we did on this show here, the 2003 fight against Brian Mitchell. That was kind of the beginning of Joe Calzaghe getting an impressive win that would lead to him getting the proper attention and accolades that he should get. A big part of our show is the interviews that we bring you each week. And this week, we get to talk to a gentleman who is a very special man. He is not only the host of Showtime Championship Boxing, he's also a play-by-play boxing announcer who has done boxing on Fox, FS1, did Broadway Boxing, a series in New York. And, of course, he's the voice of college football and basketball for Fox. And a very, very talented man, and a gracious one as well. So here's our interview with Brian Custer. Brian, thank you for joining us on this, our second episode of the podcast. And I'm so happy to have you on because you and I get to work together at Showtime, but we don't get a chance on the air to have these kind of conversations.
Absolutely. I mean, we always say some of the stuff that we talk about off the air, if we could talk about it on the air, it'd be the best stuff that I think television's ever seen.
and as a group, between you, Mauro, Ranallo, Paulie, Malignaggi, and me, we are pretty much as diverse and interesting a group as you can have. We all come at life from a slightly different vantage point.
You're so right about that. I mean, listen, Mauro, I always call him like a beautiful mind. Some of the pop culture things that he knows and then references is great. Paulie is just one of a kind. I mean, from you watch this guy, you wouldn't know that he is as conservative as he is, and some of his views are somewhat humorous. Yeah. And but hey, look, he is very adamant about what he believes in.
Paulie is very passionate,
and there's nothing. You know, you're so diverse. I mean, listen, you can talk boxing, you can talk any kind of sport, and a great singer, which I think a lot of people know. But, listen, I love our group because we have a lot of laughs every time we get together.
We do. And, broadcasting, for people that have not been involved, and let me use this as an opportunity to point out that for those of you that are, if you're unfamiliar with Brian's journey in broadcasting, he has done every sport imaginable just about, and has been a sports anchor in both Columbus, Ohio, and Dallas, Texas for many years, and has done boxing, not only boxing, but basketball, football for Fox. And you've worked with lots of different teams, and you've worked with different people. And broadcasting is great, and you can get by and do a really good broadcast. But if you genuinely are interested in the people you're broadcasting with, it makes it better, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know this because you've been in the business a long time as well. There's nothing worse when you're with someone every week, every month, and you really don't get along off the air. And it could be the worst. And I think to us, I think that's what really makes our broadcast sing, is that we really genuinely have an affection for one another off the air as friends. And I think it reflects itself on the air. And, I remember when I first started in the business, and my producer, he was the coordinating producer at a television station when I was a sports anchor. And he told me, he said, look, we got a great cast. You're a good host. He said, the best advice I can give you is if you make your colleagues shine, the broadcast is going to shine. And trust me, eventually you will get the recognition. You may not think so, but you will. And that was probably the best piece of advice I gotten. And I've always tried to take that, whatever job I've had, is to make sure that my colleagues look really, really good. Because if that's the case, the whole broadcast is going to look really, really good. And we'll all get our piece of recognition.
That well said. And I always think of you as the perfect combination of point guard and shooting guard when you need to be. And that's so you distribute the ball, but you're capable of getting some shots as well. And you've done that to a T. Now you while you're in the hosting role now, you started out your boxing journey doing the Broadway boxing shows in New York. And I saw a comment on Twitter. You said you kind of got interested in doing boxing by watching one of the Showtime broadcasts.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I'll credit Al Bernstein.
I get the credit.
And Steve Albert for really pushing me towards following my passion. And I'll never forget, it was 2005.
Yeah, right.
A sports anchor in Dallas. And I had just gotten off the air because we had done the news at 10 Central Time there in Dallas. And I had driven home, and I knew that you guys were on. I was like, I got to get home, got to watch this fight. And, Chico was such an exciting fighter. And so I'm sitting here watching Corrales and Castillo. And that fight, first of all, you guys were phenomenal describing the action. And, and that when it came to that 10th round and how Corrales pulled out that victory, I said to myself, and I distinctly saying to myself, you know what, I love this sport. And I'm going to get into boxing as a profession after that fight.
That's intriguing. And of course, you would ultimately, as I said, when you moved to New York, you got on Broadway Boxing, and that gave you, which is a series in New York that is syndicated. And that was a great chance, I think, for you to do it as an entrance to the sport and learn the sport, and while announcing with Steve Farhood, who, of course, is a wonderful partner.
Absolutely. I mean, it was only a year later. A year after that fight, we ended up, as a family, I got the offer to come to New york. I was working at a regional sports network there, here called SNY. And, yeah, they had Broadway Boxing, and, met Lou DiBella and started calling the fights there. And I was working with Steve Farhood. And it was great because it gave me the opportunity not only to call boxing, but, I got the opportunity to see a lot of the fighters that are at a championship level now that were really just up and coming then. And they were coming through New York. And so it was a great opportunity for me to get my feet wet. And the one thing I love about this, Al, is that we can finally come clean and let America know that's when I met you. And I don't know if you're going to tell them the real story about Al Bernstein, because people love Al Bernstein. Oh, he's the sweetest guy. He's this, but you got to tell them the real story of how we met and how you gave me the Heisman and stiffed me as we met that night at Broadway Boxing.
All right, I'll tell it from my vantage point, and you can tell it from yours. So I was there because Mauro Ranallo was there. I was doing an audition tape with me to on the Broadway Boxing shows. He was auditioning for his Showtime job that he would ultimately get, and I was doing that, and I was kind of focused on that. And I was introduced to Brian, but I was so focused on that, I believe I may have hi-hatted him just a little bit. Or the Heisman, as and the good part about it from your standpoint is you have never let me forget about it. Every single day since then.
You're absolutely right. We were doing a fight there at the Roseland Ballroom right there in Midtown Manhattan. And I never forget because Steve Farhood said, hey, the guys from Showtime are coming over. They're doing an audition. I said, oh, who's coming? And he said, well, this guy Mauro Ranallo is auditioning in Albert. I said, man, I love Al Bernstein. I cannot wait to meet him. He said, oh, as soon as he comes in, he goes, Al's the nicest guy. As soon as he comes in, just go right up to him and say hello. And you guys walked in. Gordon Hall came over. We said hello, this and that. And then you come scurrying through. And I said, hey, how are you? I'm Brian Custer. So great. Nice to meet you. And you just walked right on. I said, oh, my God, this guy.
Who the heck is this clown? Yeah, I was a little focused on the task at hand, I have to say. But luckily, we've gotten past that, and
yes,
a good thing. So it's interesting that you, in the sport of boxing, there, you've become known for two different things. You're as a host on the Showtime show, which is a very high-profile position, and you've done plenty of play-by-play on boxing. Do you enjoy doing the play-by-play as much as you enjoy hosting?
Yeah, I do. I mean, and as you know this too, there's nothing like calling the action when there's just a nonstop fight. Yeah. And, listen, it was great doing that at Broadway Boxing, seeing some of the guys who are at the club level trying to cut their teeth and rise up through the ranks. And then that led to me getting the call and ended up being at Showtime and doing the Showtime Extreme fights. So, it's I always laugh now when I think about some of those times where we're calling fights for Deontay Wilder and Errol Spence, and those guys are on Showtime Extreme, and now look at them now. And, and that led to doing fights for Golden Boy Live, which were on FS1. And it is always great because, I can reflect on these guys when they were up and coming, to now that they're at the championship level. And I love the skill. I love hosting. I love working with you guys and watching you guys work. And then on the other hand, too, there's something invigorating. Your juices get flowing when you're actually calling the action as well.
Right. And you're so used to that with other sports. You do a great job on football and basketball for Fox. And speaking of that, when you're there doing events with people, and I found this in the times when I used to go out and cover other sports for SportsCenter, when I was at ESPN, I would go there and I'd be doing an interview with Alex Rodriguez or somebody like that, and all they wanted to talk to me about before we did the interview was boxing. Do you get that with a lot of the sports people that you work with and other sports personalities?
Absolutely. I want to say it was not last year, the year before, I had to do a Miami Dolphins Chicago Bears game, and it was in Miami. And so we were going to the player meetings where we had, you have meetings obviously with the players right after practice on a Friday. And we went to practice, and then afterwards we were going in there. And I'll never forget, one of the guys was one of the PR guys from the Dolphins was like, hey, Brian, listen, Ryan Tannehill's going to be coming in here. We're going to have the running back coming in here, and listen, they may be a little standoffish with you at the very beginning because they haven't seen you around calling many of our games. So don't worry about that. I'll be in the room and I'll help ease anything because they're kind of skittish when they see new faces. I said, okay, fine, no problem. And it was so funny that as soon as we got in there, Ryan Tannehill walks in, he sits down and he looks over at me and goes, hey, Fury Wilder. Who do you think would win? Joshua or Wilder? Who do you think will win? Man, I love boxing. So you're calling our game? This is great. Hey, so let me ask you this. Is Anthony Joshua as big as I think he, and that's all he wanted to talk about was boxing. And it was so funny, the PR guy sitting there scratching his head like, holy cow, I've never seen this guy act like this before. But it is amazing how, whether it is college football, whether it's college basketball, whether it's the NFL, you walk into an arena and the first thing they want to talk about, say, hey, let's talk boxing. What about this guy? What about this guy? Because it is one of those sports that all of these guys watch.
Yeah, it seems like people in other sports have always had an affinity for boxing, and they really enjoy it. So you were talking about some of the fighters, and that you alluded to getting to see some of the fighters on their way up, and we get to chronicle on on our show mostly fighters that are at the championship level, and our Showbox show does a great job with the fighters coming up. We also see some, like you said on your show, the Extreme show that was airing prior to it, you would see prospects. So in boxing, there are several divisions that are really loaded with top contenders and champions. Name me one or two of your favorite divisions in boxing that you think is really loaded with talent.
Well, that's a great question. I think right off the top for me, the welterweight division. When I think of the Errol Spence, Terrence Crawford, Danny Garcia, Keith Thurman, Sean Porter. I mean, you can just go on and on and on. And it is. And now Mikey Garcia, says he wants to fight there regularly. I just love that division because it's just loaded with top names. And then you've got guys like Duran Ennis coming up the pipeline as well. So it's like, that division is just a landmine of just great fighters. And then you can take another step up to, 154.
Yeah.
154 is just as deep from the Charlos to Julian Williams, Rosario, who just got to win, Jared Hurd, Erickson Lubin. You can just name fighter after fighter after fighter. To me, those two divisions, I love them. I absolutely love them. And heck, even 168 is another one that's becoming very competitive.
Yeah, there's a number of divisions. One of the misnomers, I think, is that people think somehow boxing, the depth in boxing is low. And I don't really think that's true. In the lightweight division, which we talked about on last week's podcast with Ryan Garcia and Gervonta Davis, Lomachenko and Teofimo Lopez and all the rest, just a great division as well. So there is no question there's depth in boxing for sure. You've had something that you and I share in common, which is not the best thing to share in common, but you were a great help to me when I suffered prostate cancer about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. And the reason for that is you at a very young age, much younger than anyone would ever expect to be afflicted with it. You were afflicted with prostate cancer, and your grace in fighting it, which we got to see firsthand, was very special. And you not only got through it, but turned it into something where you could be positive and help others.
Man, it was I certainly don't wish that on anybody. It was eye-opening. I think it changed me as a person, as a man. I think whenever you face your mortality, you can only change as a person. And I wanted to change in a positive way. I was, 41, almost turning 42 when I got the diagnosis. I mean, and, I work out, at least 5 times a week, martial arts, spar, all kinds of stuff. And when he told me, my doctor told me, just doing my annual checkup, when he told me that I had cancer, that it was aggressive, and that I needed, surgery immediately. And I said, wow, surgery, doc, I've never had it in my life. Can we do another route? Let's try something. And he said, absolutely, we can try whatever you want. He said, but as aggressive as yours is going, if you do not go the surgery route, you'll probably be dead within a year. I was just floored. And, the thing, I have 3 boys, so that was the only thing I was thinking about at that time was, am I going to see them grow? Am I going to ever see them graduate high school or get married or anything? And wow, I mean, having surgery like that, and you got tested every 3 months, even after surgery, and I thought I was past it. And then I want to say a couple of years ago, he kept telling me, hey, look, I want you to come back because yours was so aggressive. That's why I'm testing you every 3 months. And when he started telling me that the numbers were creeping up, and if they got to a certain point, we were going to have to do something. We got to that point, and he was like, look, we got to do something. We got to do some high grade radiation. And I'm not gonna lie, I was devastated. I mean, I felt like I was past it. I had gotten past that hump, and he told me, you're gonna have to do 25 bouts of that. And we were in the midst of traveling. I know we were going to go to England and all kinds of stuff. And so he was like, listen, you may have to come here to the facility at 6 a.m., do this treatment for a good 25 minutes, go home, and then you need to try to get a nap in and then get on your plane and go to wherever you need to go. And that's kind of what I did. But I'll give Showtime a lot of credit because, our bosses there were very understanding, and they say, hey, look, if you need to miss a fight, don't worry about it. But they were very understanding, and guys like you, and it almost brings tears to my eyes. They were you guys calling me, checking on me, making sure I was okay. And it was rough because it was just, I was going through a lot of fatigue, not only from the treatments, but traveling so much.
Yeah.
And it was like, it was not easy. It was like from not only our fights, but at that time, I think I was doing football or basketball too. Right. So I was on the road a lot. And it would like come back, do a treatment, get back on the road, come back, do a treatment, get back on the road. And it was a lot.
And you, as I said, you fulfilled your responsibilities,
your
job while you were doing it, which is remarkable, and got through it, thank goodness. And you've used that as kind of a platform to really tell people. I know you've worked with the prostate cancer organizations to try and be a cautionary tale for everyone that they need to be checked on a regular basis.
And you know what, Al, this may sound crazy to you. When I got the diagnosis and everything, I was embarrassed. I felt ashamed. And the last thing I wanted was for anybody to know. I didn't want a single soul knowing anything. And my Dr. David Samadi, who performed my surgery, sat me down and he showed me the numbers and showed how prostate cancer was really ravaging Black men. And that, basically, 7 out of 10 Black men would be more susceptible to getting prostate cancer than anyone else. He was like, I need you. I need someone like you, as public as you are, to come forward and tell people of color, number one, they need to go to the doctor because that's something we don't do regularly. And then number two, on why and how this disease is affecting our community, and that if you do go to the doctor and get checked early on, you can nip it in the bud and live a long life, healthy life. And I was like, I don't want no one to know. I don't want the networks to know. Maybe they'll try to get rid of me if they know that I have cancer. I mean, I was really embarrassed and was hesitant. And after we sat down, I remember coming home talking with my wife about it, and she said, you need to do it. He's right. And that was the day I decided, okay, I'll go public with it and, do whatever and turn it into, as you talked about, a platform to try to get more men of color, A, go to the doctor, and B, let them know that this isn't a death sentence.
No,
you can live with this. You just got to change your lifestyle, eat better, be a more active. And that's kind of what I did. And I remember when you told me you had it, I was like, listen, bro, you're going to be okay. You know what? You're a strong guy. You're going to be all right. And, I almost, it was almost a thing where I wanted to cry because I just felt like, it's one thing for me to go through it, but then when you have a friend that tells you that, you're just like, I hate this disease. So I'm just happy everything went well with you. Your treatments went fine. But that was the thing I wanted to get out to everybody was go get checked. Yeah. It isn't a death sentence. And you can live a long, healthy life, even if you do get diagnosed with prostate.
Yeah, and you've been very active, proactive, and eloquent in doing that to people. And sometimes people are judged by what they do publicly, but I can tell people that privately you were so encouraging and always gave an ear to me. And that's the true measure of a person, when they can do that for people around them. And we're happy that both of us are doing well.
Amen.
As we go back in now after this period of being isolated because of the pandemic and the world of sports stopping literally, which is, surrealistic. As we get back with the sport of boxing, what's your general take on how it will feel and I don't even know if we can even verbalize this, how you think it'll look when we get back, and how will the sport kind of regenerate the excitement?
Yeah, because even with all sports, I just heard Dr. Fauci just say today that even if sports comes back, that fighters or even athletes are going to have to be quarantined, and no fans. So I think with boxing, it may be a little bit easier than the other sports, only for the simple fact all you have is just the two fighters and the referee in the ring. Obviously we would have us there trying to broadcast that, but it should be a little bit easier than, let's say, football or basketball, where you have so many players, especially football and basketball, and trying to put all those guys in a hotel and trying to keep them in one location. So I would think it's going to be, even for sports in general, it's going to be a new normal. And that new normal is, people are going to be scared. Some people are going to be scared about, hey, should I even be in a full arena with people I don't know, until we get a vaccine, until we get something that we know that can conquer this virus. I think all sports is going to be the new normal of empty arenas, very low arenas, and just the necessary essential people who have to broadcast that. But I'm sure all of us would even have to be tested as well, just to make 100%. Sure.
Yeah, no, that was well put. And we will all get back to, at some point, certain things will return, and we'll get back to normal. And getting through these times, we're all trying to do the best we can to stick together. And one of the ways you do that is with people that care about you and help you. And you, sir, are one of those people. And I can tell that the boxing public that you make a difference wherever you are, and probably always have in your broadcast career. Even at the time when I was hi-hatting you, didn't know you. You were that kind of person.
Well, listen, again, that goes to the beauty of our relationship. And, hey, we talk, besides doing this, we've talked on the phone. Hey, how's the family? Yeah. How's your wife? How's your son? Everybody okay? Okay, just wanted to check on you, make sure everything is okay. And that's, I hope that we start doing this a lot more often, just as a people, for people that you care about, because we get so busy sometimes. Yeah. You forget sometimes, Al, just to reach out to your friends or family, just to say hello.
And that may be a lesson we learn from this, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Brian Custer, thank you so much for joining us. You've added immeasurably to the Showtime Boxing show that in the years that you have come on, and added a lot to, and for me as a sports fan, you've added a lot, because I am a huge college football and basketball fan. And so your presence on those games has added a lot to me.
People don't know this, but I tell you what, a lot of times, some people will say, hey man, you had a great take when you were calling this game. And I should give you credit, but maybe I'll say it now. I'll say, well, I really got that in my mind. I got that from Al Bernstein when we were talking about this, but I did say it on air. So yeah, I do steal Al Bernstein's takes sometimes, and I spew them out on the air.
I don't know if you need me for college basketball and football, but I am a fan. Brian, thank you so much, and you keep safe with your family, and hopefully we'll be back on the air pretty soon.
I look forward to it. I love you, Al Bernstein.
All right, take care, Brian. So that was our chat with Brian Custer. And Trip, I know you've had the pleasure of working with a lot of people, and it's always more fun when you're working with people that you find interesting and our team players, and that really describes Brian Custer.
Well, you guys, when you watch your shows, you can tell you all like each other, and that when you see a broadcast crew that doesn't, it's kind of fun to watch from a perverse standpoint. And you've probably named 4 or 5 guys you haven't liked to work with. We can do that on next week's show.
It's a small group, but there are a couple.
Okay. And I love the fact that he gave you some garbage for blowing him off the first time you met him.
Yeah, that was, it's so funny. And of course, he is happy. Every time we have these big dinners where we all get together, and Brian is happy to tweak me and bring that up, because while we all like each other, we, of course, being men, naturally, we all give each other a hard time frequently. And that one I hear on a constant basis. And I was so focused on Mauro Ranallo I was doing he was doing his audition tape for to come on Top Rank on Showtime Boxing, and I was so focused on that I wasn't quite as jovial as I might have been with Brian. But the good thing is he's got something to hang over my head for the rest of my life, so that's always a plus.
Well, when next time I talk to Brian, I'll tell him that you never talked to me for 3 years and I was working with you. So he might not be alone.
Yeah, there were certain signals you would have to give me. And like a number of actors, like Wilford Brimley, who I got to know really well, when he was on set, nobody could look him directly in the eye and talk to him. He had a rule. And so that was the rule the unwritten rule we had.
Okay, we've got some great questions from some of your Twitter followers. The first, Prince Naseem Hamed. How great a fighter was he?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. That was asked by one of the folks, and Naseem Hamed was a WBO champ. He had 14 title defenses, which is pretty extraordinary, and he beat some good fighters like Wayne McCullough and Kevin Kelly, and did have a long and very good run as champion. He was, of course, very colorful, very arrogant, I think you can honestly say. I don't think that's a misuse of the word. And he dared you not to like him. And if you're a fan of his, of course, you loved his antics and his great entrances and the way he would showboat. But if you didn't like him, that would annoy you. And so when he finally got his comeuppance against Marco Antonio Barrera, which was the second to the last fight he would ever had, he only fought one time after that. Of course, some people were delighted that happened. Lost in all that is the central question, which is what that questioner asked. Just how good was he? He was very unorthodox. He made all kinds of basic mistakes that should have cost him in fights, but it ended up, even though he did get knocked down and it did cost him in some fights defensively, he was always able to use his overall athletic ability and power to win the day. I would say, if you want to look at it objectively, Hamed was a very, very good fighter, and I may get some blowback on this one. I would not put him in the great category. I would put him in the excellent category.
Okay, good to hear. Another question. Who during your whole career was the most exciting fighter that you ever covered?
Yeah, this one is, interestingly, somebody who I maybe did one of his fights. I for the most part, this fighter, the great Arturo Gatti, fought most of his fights on HBO and a couple other networks before that. And I didn't do very many of his fights, which means that most of the fights that Arturo Gatti was in, I was watching purely as a fan, which made it even more kind of exciting because I didn't have the worry of doing my job during it. From 1995 to 2003, he was in more exciting fights than I would say almost any boxer has been in for the last 4 decades. Even before he had his great trilogy with Mickey Ward, his 2 fights with Ivan Robinson, his fight with Gabe Ruelas, his 2 fights with Tracy Harris Patterson, his fight with Wilson Rodriguez. Go back on YouTube, take a look at those fights. Every single one of them was a war. In every single one of them, there were moments where you said, okay, Arturo Gatti, now he didn't win all those fights, but there were, even in the ones he won, there were moments where you said, okay, he's never going to get past this and win this fight. And in some cases, he did. And then to top all that off, he got to the Ward trilogy, which is one of the most exciting trilogies ever in the sport of boxing. Probably not the best because he and Mickey Ward were very good fighters, but they weren't on A-level fighters. But Arturo Gatti, wildly exciting, certainly the most exciting fighter during the time I've been announcing.
Okay, another question, very interesting. Since you've been covering boxing 40 years, you've done some great fights. What is the fight that you didn't do that you wish you had?
Yeah, I'll say it's 3 fights because it involves the same 2 people. And I've already alluded to this gentleman in a previous statement here today. Marco Antonio Barrera fought Eric Morales 3 times. And it is what I believe to be the best trilogy in the history of boxing. And I say that advisedly because, of course, Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier had a trilogy that in fights 1 and 3 produced 2 of the most exciting and important fights in the history of the sport. Though the second fight in the middle was good, it wasn't quite as good as 1 and 3. But here's the thing about the Eric Morales, Marco Antonio Barrera trilogy. Every single fight was spectacular. Barrera would end up winning the series 2-1, but the same statement applies to that trilogy that I used when I was doing the 3rd fight between Israel Vasquez and Rafael Marquez. About round 10 or 11, I said, it is literally almost immaterial who ends up winning this fight or getting the decision. It's important to the fighter and their fans, but at the end of the day, no one could come out of this with less credit because they lost. And I would say the same thing about the Morales-Barrera trilogy. It was staggering. Both men at the top of their games for all 3 of those fights, and both Hall of Famers, and what they did was remarkable.
And trilogies are very tough. Just look at The Godfather. They went 2 for 3 on The Godfather.
Exactly, yes. Trying to do a good trilogy is not the easiest thing in the world.
And our final question, Al, what's your favorite venue to call a fight from?
Yeah, I thought that was a good question from one of our the folks on Twitter. I'm going to narrow it to 2, and even that is, there are so many venues that have been fun and great to do fights from. One is the outdoor arena at Caesar's Palace, where so many of the great fights were held in the 1980s. It was, a venue that was created from whole cloth. It was in the parking lot outside their tennis complex. And what made it so special was you'd be out there under the stars in what normally was always really good weather. And it was just a tremendous atmosphere for those fights. And I'm not even a person that believes in outdoor venues. Really, my theory is boxing is a sport meant to be done indoors. Unless you can put 50,000 people there, if it's anything under 24,000, I say it belongs inside. And yet here I am talking about one of my favorite venues that is outdoors. And it was an extraordinary place to do boxing. I would also add my second choice along with it was the MEN Arena, which has had some name changes at various times, in Manchester, England. I did Ricky Hatton Costa Zoo there. I did Jeff Lacey and Joe Calzaghe. And part of what makes that arena special, it's an arena, so some could say, well, what makes that so different? What makes that place different is the fans. I've never seen such passionate fans as I saw in that arena. And the sound reverberates there in a way that is just extraordinary. And so when I would go over to do fights at the MEN Arena in Manchester, it was always a special experience. And I really enjoyed doing them over there.
Well, that's fantastic. And Caesars was fun because the commute wasn't too bad for you.
That's another thing. I could, jaunty jolly, get in my car and go down there and do those fights. Although for a part of the time I wasn't living in Vegas, but most of the time I was. And it was really an extraordinary thing. And that walk from the casino through the pool into past the tennis complex and to the parking lot was, I remember it like it was yesterday. It was very special. Well, we're happy that you joined us for this edition of Al Bernstein Unplugged on boxing. My thanks to Trip Mitchell. Thanks to Lee for doing a great job of producing and this show and guiding us through what we've done. And next week, we're going to have some fun because we are going to be visited by Bob Arum as our special guest. And you can count on Bob always for some interesting and fun statements. And it'll be fun for me to talk to him because I have such a long and shared history with him in fights that I did that involved his company. And of course, we're going to deal with the issue of what we are currently dealing with and how boxing comes back from it and what the immediate future of boxing will look like. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you next time.